The streets have been talking in college football, and I have put my ear to the streets, and the streets have been saying something like this. The Big Ten may have caught the SEC. The Big Ten may be better than the SEC this year. And I know why the streets are saying such things, because I watched the same thing you guys did. I watched USC mildly upset LSU the other night. Great game, by the way. It was a game so good, I texted Colin. I said, I know we're not in the studio. I know it's late Sunday night. I'm just going to throw on a random orange shirt and film about a 10-minute reaction video. Can you upload it? Can you make me a thumbnail? Yes, and he got it up. Immunity. Great game. And so that makes you wonder, LSU, SEC, USC, Big Ten as of 5 minutes ago. And then you watch Penn State against West Virginia, and Penn State and Drew Aller all of a sudden look better than many expected them to look. Not necessarily the JP poll, but many did not have Penn State as high as the JP poll. So then we can't just stop there. We got to continue, right? We got to irresponsibly just train headlong down this path of overreaction, and I encourage that. And that is the Big Ten better than the SEC? Now, I was willing to not talk about this tonight, but enough of you asked about it. Enough of you flat out said it, just defiantly said you believe this, that I said, well, I don't believe it yet, so I will put my numbers where my mouth is. How do you measure conference strength? The answer is not bowl results. The answer is not head-to-head. That is not how you measure conference strength because it is not equally seeded. There is no world where it's perfectly measured because there is no world where I take the top 10 teams in the SEC and the top 10 teams in the Big Ten and have number one play number one and 2 versus 2 and 3 versus 3 and see what the head-to-head result is. That would be a great opening weekend of college football, and when I'm commissioner, I may push for it, but we don't have that. The best I can do for you is I can tell you I ran through the model, the 10 teams. I went over to FanDuel, and I saw which teams in order they had to win the national title. And we took that as their implied power ratings in the conferences. So we stacked the SEC number 1 through 10 and the Big Ten number 1 through 10. And I'm going to tell you right now, so if we stack these conferences up, if we stack the SEC and the Big Ten up right now, I ran every one of these matchups through the model. I'm going to tell you what our numbers would say, but then I'm going to tell you what straight-up FanDuel Sportsbook would say about these games too. Georgia versus Ohio State, Georgia minus 4.5. Texas would be about a 3-point favorite against Oregon. Bama, field goal favorite against Penn State. Got Ole Miss minus 4 against Michigan. Tennessee minus 1 against USC. The model is really high on USC. LSU about a field goal over Iowa. Missouri by a touchdown over Wisconsin. A&M minus 9 against Washington. Oklahoma minus 10.5 against Maryland. And Auburn minus 5.5 against Rutgers. The moral of the story there is in all 10 equally seeded matchups, the model would favor the SEC team, which of course just draws cries of SEC bias and SEC favoritism, because that's certainly what we're trying to do with this thing. We're not trying to make money betting on this stuff. We're just trying to favor a conference. Makes all the sense in the world. Anyway, since I know that logic does not enter this equation much, I hit up the people who actually do put numbers up that the market can bet on. We hit our partners up at FanDuel, and as part of our partnership, I just get to ask them any question or any hypothetical at any time. So I gave them these 10 matchups, and I asked our folks over at FanDuel, give me the hypothetical number on every one of these games. And friends, I have now had Director Colin put up a new graphic, and he has highlighted everywhere that FanDuel disagrees with our model. And you'll notice nothing changed on the screen because FanDuel Sportsbook in these 10 hypothetical matchups would also either favor the SEC or would have a pick'em. There was one game, Texas versus Oregon, according to FanDuel on a neutral site, would be a pick'em game right now. Every other game, all 9 of them, they would favor the SEC team. This doesn't mean anything because the games didn't actually happen. All I'm trying to illustrate for you is the Big Ten's a very solid conference, very solid, clearly the number 2 conference in the country. Haven't quite surpassed the SEC yet, at the top, at the middle, or at the bottom. But you will notice something. As Colin showed you on that graphic, you'll notice once you got to the bottom, it wasn't like SEC team minus 2 touchdowns or more. Even with Auburn-Rutgers, the spread was inside a touchdown, which means the depth of the Big Ten is probably improving pretty quickly. Because I think the SEC is still a deep conference. So I think the depth of the Big Ten, there's a lot to be said about that. That's not the story, though. I don't think that's even the argument here. The argument to me, especially early in the season, is not which conference is better. You could talk all day about which conference is better. You know what I care more about is I think there's this switch happening before our eyes early in 2024, and that is the perceptions of the conferences are shifting. Think back in July. If you looked at the SEC back in July, coming out of media days, you probably would have said, I think Georgia's the favorite, but boy, there are like half a dozen teams that could really figure prominently into this conference championship picture. And maybe, depending on how much you believe in LSU or Missouri, you may go even 7 deep or 8 deep. And if Georgia is off their A game a little bit, then it's really game on. And anyone could win this thing. With the Big Ten, what did you say? You probably said Ohio State's going to win it, and if they don't, Oregon's going to win it. And that was the long and short of it. No one gave Penn State a second look. Most people didn't give Michigan a second look. All right, so now we're 1 week, 2 weeks for some into the season, and Georgia has about a 4-point gap in our model against the number 2 team in the country. So Georgia, at least early on, may be elevating a little bit, and maybe we get into a world where they are just the preemptive favorite to win the SEC, and maybe it's still competitive beneath them, but Georgia's the clear favorite. Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, if Ohio State's got trouble on their offensive line, if Oregon, and I think they'll rebound this weekend, but if they don't, if Oregon's got trouble, if they can't run the ball, they got trouble on their offensive line, and Penn State's stock is way up offensively, and USC's stock is way up defensively, and we don't know about Michigan, but we'll see them this weekend, then you could have, instead of in the SEC, you may have a 3 or 4-way dance for the Big Ten championship, or maybe deeper, and no one expected that. So, yeah, we can talk about which conference is better, whatever that means. I care about which one is more interesting, and I care about which one's harder to figure out, and it's still too early, but we could find ourselves by Halloween saying, wow, the Big Ten, I have no clue. The SEC's kind of sorting itself out, because that'll be after Georgia's gone to Alabama and after Georgia's gone to Texas. So we'll know by then what Georgia's made of, or they will have had a chance to validate what they already know they're made of.